There's a truth that almost nobody who earns real money wants to hear, and it goes like this. The earning is the easy part. Not easy in the sense that it requires no effort, of course it does, but easy in the sense that most people, if they put their heads down and work with any degree of competence over time, will earn enough over the arc of a career to have become genuinely secure. The numbers are there, the income arrives, and yet the security never materializes, the freedom never comes, and the person who earned it spends decades wondering where it all went. That is not a problem of earning. That is a problem of keeping. And keeping, the actual skill of retaining what flows through your hands, is the one thing almost nobody teaches you. School does not teach it. Your employer certainly does not teach it. The culture around you actively works against it because an economy built on consumption needs you to spend. And it has spent a century perfecting its techniques for making sure you do exactly that. Every advertisement, every upgrade cycle, every social comparison you make at a dinner party or scrolling through a phone at midnight, all of it is engineered to widen the gap between what you earn and what you hold. So the first thing to get absolutely clear in your mind is that earning and keeping are two entirely different skills. They require different disciplines, they reward different temperaments, and critically, they are not correlated the way people assume. A person earning $200,000 a year and spending $190,000 of it is in a structurally weaker position than a person earning $70,000 and spending $35,000. The raw income number tells you almost nothing about the trajectory. The gap between income and expenditure, that ratio, that spread, is what determines everything downstream. Now here is where most people go wrong, and they go wrong in a very specific way. They treat keeping as a residual. They earn, they spend on everything they have decided they need and want, and then they save whatever happens to be left, which is usually very little, sometimes nothing, sometimes less than nothing, because the spending had already committed future income that had not yet arrived. Keeping treated as a residual will always lose to spending treated as a priority because spending has desire and culture and social pressure behind it, while keeping has only your abstract intention, and abstract intentions crumble the moment a real opportunity to spend presents itself. The discipline runs the other direction. You decide what you are going to keep first. You move it, physically, automatically, before you can touch it, into a place that is not your spending account. What remains is what you live on. This is not a new idea. It is probably the oldest idea in personal finance. But old does not mean universally practiced. Most people hear it, nod, and then do the opposite for the rest of their lives. There's a version of this failure that is particularly instructive, and it shows up at the exact moment when you would expect it to disappear. Someone gets a raise, a meaningful raise, not a token one. And within 6 months, their savings rate is unchanged or lower because the lifestyle expanded to absorb the new income before the raise had finished clearing the first paycheck. This is so common it has a name. But having a name for it does not seem to protect people from living it. Livermore understood something about this in the context of trading that translates almost perfectly to earned income. He knew that the money in your account that you had not yet spent was the only money that could work for you. The moment it left on a bad trade, on a foolish speculation, on a lifestyle expense that meant nothing 6 months later, it was gone from the compounding engine permanently. Not temporarily, permanently. You do not get back the years that money would have worked. You only get back the nominal dollars if you are lucky, and you get them back later, which is not the same thing at all. The discipline of keeping is the foundation on which everything else is built. Without it, every other piece of financial wisdom you acquire is theory, interesting perhaps, but powerless. With it, even modest income becomes, over sufficient time, something genuinely transformative. The skill is not glamorous. It does not make for a compelling story at a dinner party, but it is the one that actually determines the outcome. There is a particular cruelty built into the way the human mind handles money that is not anticipated, and it is this. The moment you expect more income, you begin spending it not after it arrives, before. The raise you are due in 3 months has already been committed in your mind to a larger apartment or a newer car or a vacation that feels earned. The bonus you are hoping for at year-end has already been mentally allocated before the number is written on the check. This is not a character flaw. It is something closer to a reflex, and understanding it as a reflex is the first step toward overriding it. Behavioral economists have a name for this tendency, and the name does not matter nearly as much as the mechanism. When income rises, spending rises to meet it, and often rises slightly faster. The gap between what comes in and what goes out, that gap being the only gap that actually matters in personal finance, either holds steady or narrows. The person earning twice what they earned 5 years ago may be saving the same dollar amount or less because the baseline of what feels normal has quietly doubled alongside the income. You adapted upward. Everyone does. The question is whether you do it consciously or whether it happens to you while you are looking elsewhere. Most people let it happen to them, and the reason is not laziness or ignorance. It is that spending is immediate and vivid and social, while saving is abstract and deferred and invisible. When you buy something, you feel it. When you save something, you file it. The reward circuits in your brain treat those two events very differently, and the spending wins almost every time unless you have built a structure that removes the choice from the moment entirely. Automation is not a convenience here, it is a psychological necessity. The money that leaves your account before you see it cannot be spent by the version of you that exists in that moment of temptation. There's also a status dimension to this that people rarely admit out loud. Spending is legible to other people. Your house, your car, your restaurant, your clothes, these things communicate something to the world around you, and the world rewards that communication with social approval. Saving communicates nothing to anyone. Your brokerage balance is invisible to your neighbors. Your net worth does not announce itself at dinner. So there is a persistent social pressure, rarely explicit but always present, to convert your financial progress into visible form. And visible form costs money. The trader who has survived a few market cycles understands something about this at a gut level that the ordinary salaried professional never has occasion to learn. The trader knows from hard experience that a large number on a screen is not the same thing as durable wealth. It can be given back. It has been given back before in full, sometimes with interest. So the trader who has genuinely internalized the lessons of the market treats realized gains with a certain wariness, a suspicion that is really just respect. They do not immediately externalize a winning streak into a larger apartment or a more expensive life. They know the market has a long memory and an indifferent character, and that the lifestyle you build during a winning period becomes the minimum you have to defend during a losing one. This is where Livermore's thinking cuts clean. He watched men make fortunes and immediately leveraged that fortune into a way of living that required the fortune to continue. The house, the staff, the obligations, all of it stacked on top of a foundation that could shift without warning. And when the market shifted, the lifestyle did not negotiate. It just demanded to be fed. That demand became its own kind of margin call, invisible but relentless, pressing the trader back into positions he would not otherwise have taken, forcing risk he was not prepared to take, all to service a standard of living that had been built on the assumption that the winning would go on. The practical rule that comes out of all of this is uncomfortable in its simplicity. Decide what percentage of every dollar you receive will be saved before you decide anything else about that dollar. Not after expenses. Before. Treat the savings rate as the first obligation, not the residual. Whatever is left after that number is satisfied is your spending money, and you may spend every cent of it without guilt. But the number comes first, it is fixed, and it does not change because your income changed. If your income rises and your savings rate stays constant, your absolute savings rise automatically. That is the mechanism. It is not glamorous. It does not require software or a spreadsheet or a financial advisor. It requires a decision made once and then a structure that enforces it before the human brain has a chance to reroute the money somewhere more immediately satisfying. The savings rate is, in the most precise sense, your position in the long game. It determines how quickly you accumulate the capital that eventually works in your favor without you working at all. A low rate is a small position. A small position in a compounding asset takes a very long time to become meaningful. A large rate is a large position. A large position gives compounding something to work with. The math is not complicated. The discipline is. There's a version of this lesson that almost nobody teaches out loud, and it goes like this. The savings rate is not a budgeting trick. It is not a lifestyle choice in the way that people mean when they use that phrase casually. It is a position size. It is the single number that determines how much of the game of life you actually have skin in, and how quickly that skin compounds into something that can set you free. Think about what position sizing really means in trading. It means that even if you are right about the direction, even if you have read the situation correctly and the market eventually moves exactly as you expected, you can still end up with almost nothing if your position was too small to matter. The insight is real, but the stake behind it is trivial, and so the outcome is trivial. Most people live their financial lives this way. They are right about the general direction. They know they should save. They know the market tends to rise over long periods. They understand in the abstract that compounding is powerful. But the position they take behind that insight is so small that it never accumulates into anything that changes their life. They save 8% when they could save 25%. They get the direction right and miss the trade. Now here is where most people push back. They say, I do not have room to save more. My expenses are fixed. The rent is what it is. The car payment is what it is. The subscriptions and the insurance and the groceries are all fixed, and what is left over goes into savings, and that is simply the math of my situation. This is the story people tell themselves, and it is worth testing hard against reality because in almost every case it is not actually true. What is true is that the expenses feel fixed. They feel that way because they were each chosen at a moment when income justified them, and they solidified into the background of life before anyone thought to question them. The car was chosen when the raise came through. The apartment was chosen when the job got better. The subscriptions were added one at a time, each one small enough to feel irrelevant. None of them felt like a decision about savings rate. All of them were. This is the mechanism by which lifestyle becomes a debt. Not a debt to a bank, but a debt to your own future, a set of obligations you have quietly signed up for, that now determine what fraction of your earning power is actually yours to deploy. Every dollar committed to recurring expense is a dollar you have effectively leveraged against your own future income. You need that income to keep arriving at that level or higher in order to service the life you have built. Stop and sit with that for a moment because it is not metaphorical. The person who has built a life that requires 90% of their income just to sustain is in a very real sense running on margin. They have very little cushion between their current income and a disruption that threatens the whole structure. And disruptions arrive. They always have. A layoff, a medical event, a business that stops growing, a market that stops cooperating. These are not rare catastrophes. They are ordinary features of a financial life. The only question is whether you have positioned yourself to absorb one when it comes, or whether you have left yourself so extended that a single bad quarter threatens everything you have built. The practical rule is almost offensively simple. Decide the savings rate first before the spending decisions get made, and treat it as non-negotiable in the same way a trader treats a risk limit. Not aspirational, not a target you aim for when things go well. A floor. The money moves before you see it into an account that is not convenient to reach, and whatever remains is what you have to live on. This single structural choice, made once and enforced automatically, does more work than any amount of investment skill applied later to whatever small amount happens to be left over. There is a principle that serious traders learn, usually the hard way, about position sizing. It is not glamorous. It does not make for a good story at a dinner party, but it is the single variable that separates the trader who survives a bad run from the one who gets wiped out by it. The principle is this: The size of your position determines whether you live to trade another day. Get the size wrong, and it does not matter how good your read on the market was. It does not matter that you were eventually right. You will be gone before eventually arrives. Now take that principle and walk it off the trading floor and into the way you manage your actual financial life. Because the savings rate, the percentage of your income you keep every month without exception, is your position size in the largest and longest trade you will ever be in. And almost nobody thinks about it that way. Most people think about savings as what is left over. You earn, you spend, and if something remains at the end of the month, you call it savings. That is not a savings rate. That is financial luck. And luck is not a strategy. What you are actually doing when you treat savings as a remainder is sizing your position based on whatever the market happens to give you, rather than deciding in advance what you can afford to risk. Any trader who operated that way would be broke within a season. The deliberate version looks different. You decide first, before the paycheck clears, before the bill comes in, before the weekend tempts you, what fraction of your income belongs to your future. You take it off the table immediately. What remains is your operating budget. You live within that. This is not austerity for its own sake. This is discipline that serves a purpose, the same way a position limit serves a purpose. It keeps you in the game long enough for the real gains to arrive. Here is where people get it wrong in a very specific way. They think the savings rate is something to optimize later once income goes up. They reason that the absolute dollar amount saved is what matters, and since the absolute dollar amount grows with income, the percentage can stay small or even shrink. This reasoning feels sensible and is almost entirely mistaken, because lifestyle has a way of expanding to meet income and then exceeding it, and the trader who keeps ratcheting up their spending as their earnings rise never actually builds the base they need. They are perpetually running hard just to stay in place. The percentage is what disciplines you against that drift. Think about what a low savings rate actually means in practice. It means your monthly cost of living is high relative to what you bring in. It means you have very little margin for a bad month, a lost client, a medical bill, a layoff. You are trading on thin margin. In the same way, a heavily margined position gets liquidated at exactly the worst moment. When the market moves against you and you have no room, a low savings rate leaves you exposed to exactly the crises you most need to weather. The margin call on your lifestyle comes when you can least afford to meet it. Livermore understood in the context of actual trading that surviving the bad periods was a precondition for profiting from the good ones. The same logic runs straight through personal finance. A high savings rate is not just virtue, it is resilience. It is the cushion that lets you hold your position when things get uncomfortable. It is the reason you do not have to make desperate decisions under pressure. And desperate decisions under pressure are where wealth goes to die. The practical rule is simple enough to say and hard enough to live. Save first a real percentage, not a remainder, and let everything else be sized around that. Here is the thing about compounding that almost nobody understands until it is too late to make full use of it. They hear the word. They nod. They have seen the chart showing a line that curves upward and eventually goes nearly vertical, and then they go right on spending what they earn and saving what is left, which is usually very little, and they wonder years later why the number in their account does not look anything like the chart they were shown. The misunderstanding is this: people think compounding is something that happens to money. It is not. Compounding is something that happens to time. The money is just the vehicle. Time is the engine. And the cruelest fact about that engine is that it runs at wildly different speeds depending on when you start feeding it. A dollar put to work at 25 does not do twice the work of a dollar put to work at 45. It does something closer to 4 or 5 times the work because it has decades of reinvested growth layered on top of reinvested growth layered on top of more reinvested growth. The math is not linear. It is exponential. And exponential growth is something the human mind is genuinely structurally bad at intuiting. This is where most people make the critical error. They treat their early working years as the years for living and their later years as the years for saving. They have it exactly backwards. The early years are the most financially powerful years of your life, not because your income is highest, it almost certainly is not, but because every dollar you save then has the maximum amount of time to compound. Spending heavily in your 20s and early 30s is not just a lifestyle choice. It is a decision to forfeit the most productive capital you will ever have access to, which is time itself. You can earn more money. You can find a better paying job. You can build a business. You cannot go back and retrieve the compounding years you already spent. Now here is the doubt worth sitting with. Does it actually matter where that money compounds, or just that it does? This is where the modern landscape offers something genuinely worth understanding. A broad market index fund, something like a total stock market fund or an S&P 500 fund, does not require you to pick the right stock or find the next great company. It requires only that you get money into the market and leave it there long enough for the compounding to do its work. The fees on those instruments are low enough now that friction is almost not a factor. The enemy is not the expense ratio. The enemy is the human being who pulls the money out during a bad year because the pain of watching the balance drop feels more real than the abstract future gain of staying in. Compounding is not just a mathematical process. It is a psychological endurance test. Most people fail it not because they chose the wrong fund, but because they could not sit still. There is also a version of this failure that looks responsible from the outside. Someone faithfully contributes to their 401k, which is genuinely good, but they also cash it out every time they change jobs, paying the taxes and the penalty and wondering where the balance went. Or they borrow against it, or they take the conservative option inside it because they are nervous about volatility, and they watch the equity portion grow at a rate that barely keeps pace with inflation, while the compounding engine runs on idle for 20 years. The account exists, the contributions were made, but the time was wasted because the money was not working hard enough inside the structure they had. Livermore understood something essential about letting a position run. He knew that the impulse to take a small profit early, to lock it in, to feel the satisfaction of a realized gain, was one of the most expensive habits a speculator could have. The same principle governs a retirement account across decades. The urge to touch it, to rebalance it into something safer when markets fall, to harvest it early for something that feels urgent. That urge is the enemy. The position is your savings. Sitting tight is the discipline, and the reward for that discipline is not just a larger number. It is options, it is choices, it is the capacity to say no to things you do not want, which is the only real definition of freedom that holds up under pressure. Freedom is not a number. That is the first mistake people make when they start thinking about money seriously. They pick a figure, some round number with enough zeros behind it, and they tell themselves that when the account hits that mark, they will be free. But freedom is not a balance. Freedom is a duration. It is measured in years of life that belong entirely to you, years in which no employer, no client, no margin clerk, no landlord can reach into your morning and tell you where to be. And here is the thing about years: you cannot buy them at any price once they are gone. You can buy back a losing trade. You can rebuild a depleted account. You can find another opportunity in another market in another season. But the years you spent earning money for someone else, under conditions you did not choose because your cost of living left you no alternative, those years are spent. They do not compound. They do not come back on a recovery. So when you are thinking about what your savings rate actually means, stop thinking about it in dollars and start thinking about it in time. A person who saves aggressively, genuinely aggressively, not the polite definition of the word, is not just accumulating capital, they are buying back years. Every percentage point they add to their savings rate is a fraction of a year. They will not have to trade their time for someone else's agenda. The math on this is not complicated, but most people never sit down and run it because the answer is uncomfortable. The person saving 10% of their income is working, under rough approximation, for many more decades than the person saving 40 or 50% of the same income. The gap is not linear, it is enormous. The difference between a modest savings rate and a serious one is not a few years at the end of a career. It is often a decade or more of life, retrieved from obligation and returned to you while you are still young enough to use it well. Now here is where most people go wrong, and it is worth staying on this a moment. They treat freedom as a destination that becomes relevant only at the end of the working years. They think of it as a retirement question, something to revisit in their 50s, something the target date fund in the company 401k is quietly handling on their behalf. But freedom does not work that way. Freedom is not a cliff you fall off at 65. It is a spectrum, and you move along that spectrum or you fail to move based on decisions you are making right now, this year, this month. Every year you buy back is a year of optionality. It is the ability to leave a job that is grinding you down without catastrophe. It is the ability to take a risk on something you actually believe in without staking your rent money on the outcome. It is the ability to say no, which is in many ways the most powerful word in the English language and the one that costs the most to say when your expenses are high and your reserves are thin. Livermore understood this kind of leverage, though he learned it the hardest way possible by losing it repeatedly and having to rebuild. The man who must earn next month's income cannot think clearly about the trade in front of him. The pressure of necessity corrupts judgment. It narrows the horizon to the immediate, and in markets as in life, the immediate is almost never where the real opportunity lives. The real opportunity lives in patience, in the ability to wait. And waiting is only free when your costs are covered by something other than tomorrow's performance. So the question is not what number makes you free. The question is how many years you are willing to buy and how seriously you are willing to price them. There's a particular kind of trader who earns your respect not for how much he made in his best year, but for where he is 20 years later. You have seen the other kind too. The ones who ran their account up tenfold in a bull market and were broke by the next cycle. The ones who called the right move at the right time, pocketed a number that should have changed their life, and somehow arrived at the following decade with nothing durable to show for it. The earning was real. The keeping never happened. What separated the ones who stayed rich from the ones who didn't was not intelligence. It was not even discipline in the market, though they usually had that too. It was something quieter and less glamorous. They treated the money that left their trading account with the same seriousness they treated the money inside it. They understood at a level most people never reach that a dollar saved from consumption compounds just as faithfully as a dollar invested. The math does not care how the dollar arrived in the account. It only cares whether it stays. Most people who make serious money in the markets for the first time make the same mistake. They recalibrate their life to the new number. The apartment gets bigger, the car gets replaced, the dinners get more expensive, and the trips get longer. None of this feels like a decision. It feels like a reward, and in a narrow sense it is. But what they have actually done is raise their cost of survival. They have raised the floor beneath which they cannot fall without pain. And when the market eventually takes back some of what it gave, and it always does, they are not just losing paper gains. They are losing the infrastructure of a life they have already built and cannot easily dismantle. That is a different kind of loss. It has consequences that extend well past the brokerage statement. The traders who stayed rich understood something about reversibility. They were slow to let expenses become permanent. A variable cost is a manageable thing. A fixed cost is an obligation. The moment your lifestyle requires a certain level of income to sustain itself, you have written yourself a contract with no exit clause. You have created a margin call that does not come from a broker. It comes from your own monthly obligations, and it arrives on the same schedule whether the market cooperated that month or not. This is where the savings rate becomes something more than a personal finance metric. It is a measure of your operational independence. A person saving 40 or 50 cents of every dollar they earn is not just building wealth faster. They are shrinking the gap between where they are and where they no longer need to answer to anyone or anything outside their own judgment. A person saving a dime of every dollar is doing something structurally different. They are running a high leverage operation on their own life. They need nearly everything to go right just to stay in place. One bad year, one health event, one gap in income, and the whole structure is under pressure. The traders worth studying long term were not the ones who lived grandly on their winnings. They were the ones who lived well within them. There is a meaningful difference between those two things. Living well within your means is not deprivation. It is a structural advantage. It means your survival does not depend on your next trade, your next paycheck, your next good year. It means you can sit with a bad position or a bad period without being forced to act by pressure that has nothing to do with the market. Forced action at the wrong time is the most expensive thing in this business. The man who has built real margin into his personal finances never has to act from desperation. He acts from judgment. That is the rarest and most durable edge in this entire game, and it costs nothing to build except patience and the willingness to want less than you can afford. There is no asphalt boulevard to success in Wall Street or anywhere else. Why additionally block traffic? More wisdom for the patient speculator every week at charthorizon.com.